In this video, I'll be explaining what periodization is, why it's used, and the different types there are. Periodization means the planned manipulation of training variables over time in order to maximize adaptations. The theory behind it is that by changing variables such as volume and intensity, you can reduce the risk of overtraining and plan for peak performance at a certain time point. For instance, if an athlete has a yearly strength competition, they want to be at their strongest on the day of the comp. Rather than doing the same program year round, they might break their training up into phases to help them peak for the competition. While you can periodize for other outcomes such as speed or power, in this video I'll predominantly focus on strength. To understand the rationale for periodization, we should consider how attributes such as strength and muscle mass are related. Strength is influenced by neural efficiency or your ability to recruit muscle fibers, as well as how much muscle mass you have. A good way to think of it is that muscle mass determines your strength potential. At a certain size, you'll have a limit on how strong you can be, and by adding more muscle, you'll increase this limit. To help demonstrate the importance of muscle mass, we can look at research with powerlifters. In this study of 20 elite powerlifters, performance was strongly correlated with fat-free mass. In other words, athletes with more muscle mass could lift more on the squat, bench press, and deadlift. This makes sense, as over years of practice, we expect lifters to reach a technical ceiling for these movements. This means they master the motor pattern or neural component of each lift, and strength therefore mostly comes down to size. Due to this relationship, it's clear that if we want to maximize strength, hypertrophy should also be addressed. If we only do high intensity training in the 1 to 5 rep range, it'll be hard to accumulate enough volume to optimize muscle growth. While we could add more sets, this won't be a very efficient way to build muscle and may also increase risk of injury. For these reasons, many athletes will periodize their training or manipulate variables over time. This is generally done to build muscle first and then maximize strength with specific high intensity work. Not only may this help for physiological reasons, but it can also reduce training monotony and provide a psychological benefit. Periodization can take many forms. The 3 models you'll most likely encounter are linear, undulating, and block. Linear or traditional periodization is a method where training volume decreases as intensity increases over time. Traditionally, this meant over the course of a year or longer, but can also apply to shorter timeframes. For example, you could start a 12-week program at 70% of your 1 rep max and gradually increase the intensity to 90%. Undulating periodization is a system where volume and intensity go up and down over time. The 2 main types are weekly and daily undulations. With weekly undulating programs, the fluctuations happen week to week, whereas with daily undulations, they happen day to day. For example, with a daily undulating program, you may train the upper body 3 times per week, but with different intensities or objectives. Mondays may focus on hypertrophy, Wednesdays on strength, and Fridays on power. Block periodization, as the name implies, involves breaking training up into distinct blocks. For example, an athlete may do an accumulation block with a focus on hypertrophy, then an intensification block with a focus on strength, and finally perform a taper or strategic deload leading up to a competition. This could then be repeated to peak for multiple competitions within a year. While these are different methods of periodization, they're not mutually exclusive and can all coexist. For instance, you could have daily undulations within separate training blocks that progress in a linear fashion over time. To help differentiate non-periodized programs, these are ones where variables don't change over time. For example, if you did a program with 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps indefinitely, this would be without periodization. While you'd be lifting more as your strength increased, the relative intensity would be unchanged. When we look at the research, it appears periodization does have a positive effect on strength. This meta-analysis showed a benefit for strength but not hypertrophy in both trained and untrained individuals. It also found a benefit of undulating compared with linear periodization in trained lifters. One thing to be aware of is this doesn't mean every program with periodization beats every program without it. When studies compare periodized to non-periodized programs, they're not really comparing the models themselves. Rather, they're comparing one specific program against another. Models of periodization can be applied in many different ways, and as mentioned earlier, can also coexist. A common criticism of periodization research is that there's often a difference in peak intensities. For example, a non-periodized program may only use an intensity of 75% of 1 rep max, whereas a periodized program may progress from 60 to 90% of 1 RM. Average intensity and volume may be matched, but the periodized group will get exposure to heavier weights. When these studies show a benefit, it may be due to practice at higher intensities, rather than the effect of periodization itself. 2 studies where peak intensity was matched are these from Schroeder and colleagues. In these studies, multiple intensities within each session was compared with weekly undulating periodization. Basically, one group did some heavy, moderate, and light training within every workout. Sets 1 to 2 were performed with 4 to 6 reps, sets 2 to 4 with 12 to 15 reps, and sets 5 to 6 with 20 to 25 reps. The weekly undulating group did the same rep ranges, but varied them week to week instead of within sessions. Both methods increased strength and power, with no significant difference between groups. So while periodization works great, you may be able to get similar benefits by varying the intensity within each session. This could be done by training heavy on the main exercises and doing lighter sets with accessory work. Alternatively, you could start each exercise with some heavy sets before reducing the intensity to add volume. As variables don't change over time or between sessions, these can be considered forms of non-periodized training. Ultimately, there are plenty of good strategies for building strength. While the research shows a benefit to periodization, there's no clear consensus on exactly why this is. It may be due to the relationship of hypertrophy and strength, the higher relative loads of periodized programs, or the mental benefit of training variety. Regardless, at this stage it's still probably a good idea to periodize your training, or at least vary the intensity within sessions.